Okay, so I'm making this video for people who want to know how I made my stove. The outside box is just a box. It's stainless steel. Okay, the inside part slides right out. This, all the vents, everything, this come out of a commercial coffee maker. You know, the kind that would be in a convenience store. You want a cup of coffee and there's two pots. One on the bottom thing and one on the top, and this was part of the top, and it come off just the way it is. I didn't do anything to that. The sides were longer. I had to cut them here and here, and this is stainless steel, so cut them with an angle grinder, same as the door. It's cut. These are old hinges that I pop riveted on here and made it so the door opens and closes. Now this is the part that fits inside. The thing is, the box being totally separate from this and the way it fits in there, the heat doesn't go into the box. That's the problem with cooking with candles, is the candles tend to overheat on a lot of different things because the heat all builds up around them. Well, you can see these ones are right up out of the outside piece, and as I raise them, they go higher. The bottom piece, this piece here that they set in, is just a bottom of a can. The inside section is the bottom of a tomato juice can, and I've cut it on an angle, and there's screws on all three sides. Now, it's together, a lot of it is held together with this red high temperature silicone gasket making stuff, and that's why I can't take it apart. It's like it's glued together. That's how the stove is. That's what I've been cooking on for a couple of years now. When I feel like cooking on candles, I do. Now this is the pot that goes with it. This pot is a 2.5 quart saucepan. It's a Mayer pot. If you look inside, I've got a layer of aluminum with the shiny side in around the pot. And then this outside piece was, I believe it was part of a steamer. A friend of mine dropped it off one day, said he'd seen it at the local thrift store and thought it was something I could use. And I definitely did. I cut the bottom out of it with a hacksaw blade in my jigsaw and then ground it so that it fits in there fairly good. And then you can see it's just snugged up there, and then with the silicone in there, that holds it in place. Has for 2 years now. It wasn't quite deep enough this way, so I added a ring around it here, and then to keep the bottom up off the stove, I put, this is that high temperature gasket silicone, and I put 4 globs and set it down on parchment paper with spacers to hold it at the height I want it. So you can see that it leaves that space around the bottom of the pot and the top of the stove. So it gives the heat a place to go. Now the holes are designed so that the heat goes up in between this piece of aluminum and the pot. That keeps the pot a lot hotter. It's not losing the heat there. And then some of the heat comes out here. If it gets too much heat, then it can roll around the bottom of this and come out these holes. It works really well. This is the first stove like it that I ever made. It only holds 3 candles, and it's the one I use to make coffee. And I've used this a couple of 100 times now, I bet. Never have a problem. You can see better how the notches are cut here. I divide it into thirds because the 3 points are easier to balance than 4. And the curves are cut around the can to match. And then this one, I drilled the holes out right along where the line is here, so that when it sets down in the notch, it's set in the same height. Same height the whole way around. It's got a centerpiece, and I mean, like I said, this is the first one I ever made, and I used it a lot. There's one using metal strapping And see a piece of the all-around metal strapping. I used it here, ground it out so that it's adjustable. I made this one. Notched along the sides, works really well. It holds 4 candles. You can cook anything on this that I can cook on my stainless steel one that's in the video. Works a lot better with a pot like this. This makes a big difference if you're cooking with candles. But it's one of a kind. I don't know how to tell you where to get the pieces and parts. But pop rivets and high temperature gasket maker and piece of aluminum and do what you can. So I'm going to make a video how that stove was made. Have a good day, folks, and thanks for your interest in cooking with candles. Keep checking out my site. I'm going to be making more of what I like to call the Candleman Creations, and I'm selling them. If anyone's interested in buying, send me a message, we'll talk. Here's a picture of most everything you need to make this stove. I use a knife to cut the label off the can, that way I can use it to measure. I measure the label, then I mark it in 3 equal places, and then use it to put the marks around the can. I use my speed square to put lines on the can for the marks. I mark on the rings around the can the different heights I want for the cuts that I'm going to make. I like the candles to raise and lower at least 1 inch, and I mark that angle on the can. The same angle gets marked on all 3 sections of the can so everything goes even. I use my awl to start holes where I'm going to be drilling. One section of the can gets a hole for each height adjustment I want when using it. The other 2 sections just have a hole where I want the angle to start and to finish. Now I use my tin snips to make the necessary cuts. After making rough cuts with the tin snips, I use files to smooth things out and remove all the sharp edges. The edges can be very sharp, so I suggest that you keep band-aids handy. You can use tin snips or an angle grinder with a cutting blade to cut the can to height where you want it. On this particular stove, I used the bottom of the can as a new bottom for the stove to smooth things out, but this really isn't necessary. I use 1/2 inch melamine to make a base for the stove so it's more stable when it's being used. I use my speed square to mark the center of the base. I also drill extra holes around the top of the can to allow better ventilation for the candles. I pre-drill a hole in the base and put a nail up through it for everything to pivot on. Now I cut a piece of 3/4 inch wood into a circle to fit inside of a tuna can. I use the high temperature silicone to hold the wood in place. This really isn't necessary, but I do it. Then I cut the can down so that it is the same height as the piece of wood inside it. Again, I use the label of this can to mark it out into 1/3, 3 equal spaces. Then I drill a hole through the center of the can just a little bigger than the nail to allow it to move freely. It's very important for the center to be marked quite accurately. Then I drill a hole through the lid of the can that I'm using to make the outer part of the stove from. I use the high temperature silicone to put the lid of that can on top of the tuna fish can. I also trim about 1/8 of an inch off around that lid so it'll fit easily inside of the outer stove. I pre-drilled 3 holes around the inner part of the stove, the tuna fish can. The inner part of the stove goes over the nail, and the outer part gets centered on that and fastened down to the 1/2 inch base. Now I cut a piece all around and use pop rivets to let it set freely around the top of the stove. You can put 4 tea lights in it and you're ready to start cooking. This is an old pot that I have out here in the garage that I can use for experimenting. I like to put tin foil on the cover to help keep the heat in. And you can adjust the candles. You want them so that the tip of the fire on the candle doesn't hit the bottom of your pot, because that will make a big carbon deposit and a mess. I have 20 ounces of water in the pot, and I'm going to bring it to a boil the best I can. I hope you all appreciate this, because I built this stove and now I'm sitting here waiting for water to slowly come to a boil. I'm not cooking anything, I'm just heating 20 ounces of water, 2 soup cans of water, and so I got nothing else to do but sit here waiting for water to boil. It takes a while, but it will boil. Candles are dangerous. Never leave your candles unattended. If you're going to be cooking with candles, stay in the vicinity of your stove and keep an eye on it. I know not everyone has the ability to make one of these stoves, but if you want one, leave a message in the comments and we'll work out a deal on getting it shipped and paid and all that stuff. Have a nice day, folks. Cooking with candles can be dangerous. Never leave your candles unattended. As far as price, I'm thinking $50, and that will include shipping here in Canada.